I'd like to invite Yolanda Waters from Queensland University of Technology. She's presenting on Is the Great Barrier Reef a Flagship for Climate Action, a behaviour change experiment for reef conservation outreach. Thanks, Yolanda.
Okay, I'm going to try and stick to the time, so I'm not going to introduce myself. All right. So when it comes to climate action and the reef, it's safe to say we are not doing enough. And while you might immediately think we're not doing enough at a government or policy level, which is entirely appropriate, we're also not doing enough at an individual and community level. Despite most Australians caring for the Great Barrier Reef, being concerned about its future and really not wanting it to disappear, for most of us, this care and concern is not translating into action. In fact, a survey showed, how do you click it? Which is the button? Anyway, I'll keep talking. Okay. A survey showed, they asked 4,000 Australians, what can you do to help the Great Barrier Reef? Less than 5% even connected actions to do with climate change as things that could help the reef. And less than 2% mentioned any kind of civic or social action, including voting for those who support climate policy, as things that could help protect the reef, which is a bit of a problem. We call this the attitude-action gap, and it's a gap that we need to close if we're to help protect the reef into the future. That is, we need to find ways that engage people with climate action to help save the Great Barrier Reef. Now, the problem is, doing that, engaging people with climate action is really, really hard. All right? Decades of climate communications and engagement research has pretty much said it's really complex, there's no one way to do it, but here are some things you can try. And one of those things is that if you want to engage people with climate change, you need to first communicate it in a way that is personally relevant, in a way that people can connect with and identify with. You need to use icons, things that people can really understand. So we thought, well, hey, we know something lots of people connect with: the Great Barrier Reef. Surveys show that most Australians, whether they live near the reef or not, connect with or identify with the reef in some way. It's a national icon, it's a global icon, it's a symbol and a well-known victim of climate change. So we thought, well, okay, can we use this? So our research question was, does the Great Barrier Reef provide a relevant and inspiring focus point for climate communication in Australia? And if so, what kind of messages work best? In other words, does the reef inspire action? What we did is we ran 2 online experimental surveys with over 1,400 Australians, and we randomly allocated them different messages about the reef and climate change, and we measured differences in behaviour. Now, we measured climate behaviour in a few different ways, and I can go about them in detail later. We measured intentions and actual behaviour, because we know we don't always do what we say we're going to do. So intentions were measured as private sphere intentions, and when I say that, I mean like lifestyle behaviours like switching off the lights, and public sphere intentions, which are those civic and social behaviours like talking to others about climate change, signing petitions, writing to your local politician. And actual behaviour, we did things like put petitions within the survey. And so we found one very exciting, or a few very exciting. First one, findings, is that something I'm sure all of you feel in your heart to be true: the reef can inspire action. So this graph here shows the mean Z-score for private sphere intentions, those energy-reduced behaviours. And you can see that we compared a message about the reef and climate change with a message just about climate change with no message at all. And you can see that those who received the message about the reef were significantly more likely to say they would do things like reduce energy use at home, which is really exciting. The reef's doing something good. But this is just for private sphere intentions. We did not find the same result for those public sphere and actual behaviours, the things we'd ideally like people to really be involved with. So we set out to find out, well, what can we add to a reef message? How can we get the reef message to get people to do more things? So we tested some other kinds of messages. We tested normative statements, which is telling people everyone else does this, efficacy statements emphasising you can do it or we can do it, and we played with different calls to action. We found one message overall to increase private sphere intentions, public sphere intentions, and actual behaviour. And that's this message here. It was a message which emphasised collective efficacy. That's emphasising we can all do it. Together, we can have an impact. And the call to action was not a call to reduce energy use, but a call to actively support renewable energy, a call to be an active citizen, a call to get out there and talk about climate change. Why this is interesting is because, whoops, it's missing a slide. Why this is interesting is because this is not what typical communications about individual action for the reef look like. I went and Googled, what can I do to help the reef, which I'm sure many Australians have sat at home and done. And what comes up, all the top searches come up, and none of them emphasise this kind of public sphere behaviour or collective action. They all focus on you can reduce your personal carbon footprint, you can stop using plastic straws, you can do these lifestyle actions, when actually, if this research is anything to go by, those messages are not as effective as we think. And this kind of message, remember, this also increased energy use behaviours as well. So this kind of message could be the way to go for communicating and trying to get people involved in action for the reef. And I think the takeaway from all of this is that behaviour change is really complex. And we need to really think about that when constructing messages about complex things like the reef and climate change. Because what we think might make people do something might do the opposite. So if we can keep behaviour change in mind, try and use evidence-based communication strategies when we can. And there's actually not a lot out there about reef or marine climate communication in general. So if you have a chance to check if your message is working, I highly recommend that you do it and let me know what happens. And yeah, thank you. Any questions?
Thanks for your talk. I would like to know if you're going to be sharing your findings once you've concluded your research with big government institutions.
If they would like that.
And if we work within those institutions, how can we work cooperatively with governments to get these renewable energies from a communications point of view?
Yeah, well, I think, so we're finishing this one at the moment, but our plan is a suite of studies, similar studies, and how we can get people involved in these kind of behaviours. And I think the goal would be to come up with some kind of a guide or a list of recommendations that we could come to different organisations and government and say, well, this is how, we've found that this set of things works in engaging people this way, and so maybe we can help you use those or apply those in some way. So that would be kind of the end goal, to kind of integrate what we're finding into real world things that the community sees and they kind of act on.
And do you have communication strategies to influence those policy decisions?
I'm not sure your question, sorry.
That's okay, we'll talk later.
Oh, all good? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Yolanda.